We're very lucky to have Stephen Tupu of Terrain-NYC to be here in Aotearoa in person. I think the thing about this conference is we have a few people dialing in, but it's great to have Stephen here in person. So this morning's session is about partnerships and collaboration, and Stephen is going to talk about landscapes of equity, challenges and opportunities for landscape architects in affordable and supportive housing and public space projects. So please welcome Stephen to the stage.
Kia ora tātou katoa, ka mihi atu kia kotou. He hui hui, mai tēnei hui, tēnei rā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā katoa. Talofa lava ele pai ia, ma malamalu ele ofa lenei whanotanga, malo suifua manuia. Good morning, and it's such a pleasure to be here in person. It's fitting to follow a tribute to Megan. I will just say that we studied together at RMIT, and continues to be an amazing inspiration. And we did a joint thesis together, so you can imagine how that went. And so, yeah, I think it was really beautiful that the Tuia, Pito, Ora recognized Megan in this setting so that we could all be together. So I appreciate that. So my name is Stephen Tupu. I'm a landscape architect, and for the past 20 odd years I've been based in New York City. I opened Terrain in 2004 with the dream of creating a practice that was focused on a collaborative approach to design, and I'm fortunate enough to be part of an inspiring team of designers, makers, gardeners, and ecologists. Growing up in Aotearoa in the Pacific and experiencing a Kiwi childhood and having access to this incredible country has shaped me in the work of my office. Being a Pacific Islander has drawn me to contribute to projects that address some of the challenges of minority communities and populations of colour, including affordable and supportive housing and access to safe open spaces and connecting people to nature. This slide includes some baby photos of me in my first garden. There's an image of my father tending some native trees in our village in Savai'i in Samoa, and just some beautiful images of this country, the Wairarapa, where I'm currently based, and also the East Coast, Ngāti Porou country, Tokomaru Bay, very special to me. Working in New York City and experiencing the growth of the city over 2 decades, including the transformation of the industrial edges, waterfronts, and neighborhoods, has been an incredible experience, and ultimately given me a sense of hope that these urban landscape transformations can have huge positive impacts. The image on the left, this is an aerial photograph of New York City. You can see the Hudson River, Manhattan, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. This transformation has included the design of many world-class new parks, such as Riverside Park South and the Hudson River Park on the west side of Manhattan, the new park on Governor's Island, Brooklyn Bridge Park south of the Brooklyn Bridge, and the High Line in Manhattan's neighborhood of Chelsea. These are significant large-scale parks and landscapes and provide new, well-designed and open spaces accessible to those adjacent neighborhoods. Terrain has been working within neighborhoods that don't have easy access to these types of urban landscape improvements. These neighborhoods have little access to well-maintained, safe open spaces and are often in areas that have experienced decades of division, neglect, and disinvestment. This is a historical timeline of affordable housing in the US. And we developed this with some colleagues on the West Coast, interstice architects, and it's been really useful for us working in this space of affordable and supportive housing to understand where we've come from and the history of affordable housing in the US. And so I'll just pick up a few sort of key points that have been really useful for us. The first one is, landscape architects have played a key role in housing from the very earliest projects. Phipps Garden Apartments in Sunnyside, Queens, is 1928. The landscape architect was Marjorie Sewell Courtley, and her idea for this space was connecting and really celebrating the specific feel of the space, and also using native plants from the Northeast, and connecting people to nature. In the 1960s, the Tower in the Park model, Le Corbusier's concept of city within a city, took over a lot of the ideas around public housing. So there was slum clearance, urban renewal was happening in a lot of cities. And at this time, there was a lot of this type of housing that was built. Many of these developments are being rethought. So we're 60 years on, and a lot of these large tower housing projects are really being rethought both architecturally, but also in terms of landscape. The third point is the rise of non-profit organizations taking the lead to provide affordable housing over the last 15 to 20 years. And this has really been driven by non-profit organizations picking up the baton and really trying to improve issues of homelessness and the cost of housing in the US. And so with that, we got enhanced programming. So you got mission-driven non-profits. So they would build and they develop the space and run it and manage it long-term. So they have specific programs for their residents. And at the same time, 15 to 20 years ago, we got the shift into more sustainable sort of building practices. And I think this is really key in terms of what we're seeing now, probably the last 15 to 20 years. For the past 15 years, we have partnered with non-profit client teams and collaborated with architects, clients, engineers, designing new and affordable and supportive housing throughout the city. To date, we have completed over 50 residential developments across the city that include a total of 5,000 residential units. Most of these projects have been made possible with a mix of city and state funding and philanthropy, with non-profit organizations developing and managing ongoing operations. We have focused on the design of these open spaces, shared amenity spaces, streetscapes, community gardens and rooftop farms and that are part of these projects. Our expertise, our sort of experience over this period of building has taught us that there are three key elements that keep coming to the top and are part of our process. And the first one is developing site-specific design strategies for projects with limited resources, using the creative power of collaborative teaming, and I'll talk more about that with specific projects. The second one for us has been for project types such as multifamily, senior housing, shelters, and other transitional housing, previously homeless adults, youth and families, veterans, previously incarcerated individuals, the understanding of the unique programmatic needs of diverse resident populations, and how these needs can inform accessible design for all. And then lastly, the development of sort of innovative ways of building ecologically robust and resilient projects. The following projects were really selected to illustrate some of the opportunities presented by challenging sites and the benefits they brought to their communities. And so this first project is not a housing project, but it has had a big impact on the surrounding neighborhood. This is in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, and we were invited to design one of these courtyards as part of this industrial sort of renovation. So this industrial buildings, factories, being converted to maker spaces, small food supply shops, fabricators, designers. So we redesigned one of these courtyards in a way that could respond to those new needs and that new program, but also thinking about the surrounding neighborhood and all of the sort of excess of the lack of open space for those adjacent housing developments. And so over time, this has really grown into something that's used by the neighborhood much more than just the scale of the small residents or the users that are right on the project. The interesting thing about this project was it's a post-industrial sort of use, so new uses. And one of the first things that when we visited the site was, could we sort of imagine something that was really exuberant and bursting with life? And so the idea was to plant the seeds of an urban forest and to sort of trigger something that could really grow and change and be dynamic over time. And so the urban forest was a big key piece of this, but also it needed to be flexible enough to allow lots of different uses. So simple materials, concrete, paint, budget was tight, but we just kept it. We had designed some built-in elements that could be used by kids and families, playful elements, but not play equipment. This is the second year of the sort of urban forest, but really just trying to mimic the Northeast. They have an amazing woodland sort of plant collection, so thinking about spring ephemerals, native ferns, some of these really dynamic seasonal changes that we don't really experience here. I mean, we could really play with that. So the image on the left was when it was a working factory, so there were rail cars would come in, drop raw materials off and take finished goods out. The image on the right was our first visit to the site. And in the office, we spend a lot of time. For me, it's really important for a new project to sort of be on site with the team. And it's some of those first conversations I think can really crystallize, a thread that will run through the life of the project. We're also in the same development able to have some impact on the streetscape, and so on the right-hand side of this, you can't really see it, but there's I guess a skip or a dumpster. So we use these big sort of mobile planters with a whole range of different planting that could be moved around the development as they develop different phases. And then this is the new entry to the New York Nets basketball training program. So they've taken over the top floors, but this is the new street edge as an entry to their facility. This project really goes back to the point I was making about a lot of these housing projects that were built in the 60s with sort of the idea of tower in the park. This is Morningside Gardens, sort of Upper West Side, just kind of on the edge of Harlem. And we've been working the last 2 years with that community, and we've had this opportunity to really rethink all of the open spaces, plazas, building entrances, from a landscape point of view, given the sort of change in residents. So there's a shift from some of the older residents that have been there from the very beginning, and you've got new families coming in. And so thinking about these, designing in a way that can really, have a new life and provide different program. A lot of the materials after 60 years, you can imagine, are kind of failed, and so it's a really simple project. We're redoing a lot of the walkways, better materials, a lot of built-in seating. the image on the left was pre-urban renewal, so a lot of parts of New York City were, slum clearance, urban renewal. A lot of these communities were, demolished, moved out, and, a lot of the NYCHA, a lot of the New York City Housing Authority projects were around that time. A lot of our sites are renovated or renovations, and we're very aware of, and I think coming from a sort of a Kiwi background and being really efficient with materials and hating waste. My grandmother's going to love me saying this. We're often, there's so much waste in the sort of building industry anyway, and so we often come across, for example, the image on the left, existing benches that are still around from the 1960s, good solid steel. There were probably close to 100 that could have just been thrown out, but we saved them, renovated them, and made them actually more comfortable on the right-hand side. So thinking about materials as having more than one life, and so trying to sort of use as much as we can. And so we're often adding elements and thinking about renovation in those ways, which I think has been useful given these older sites. Going down in scale, this is probably typical of some of our housing developments. This was actually the first one that we completed with one of our colleagues and collaborators, Map Architecture, and this was, in a way, set the stage for a lot of projects that have come after this, and we were testing new ideas and working together. And I would say from the point of collaboration, this was kind of a milestone for both offices, and we've continued to work on multiple projects, and we've really been able to sort of develop a design language and almost a kind of a shorthand, and so it's been really great to have the time to do that. And as I said before, a lot of these new housing developments are, they have high sustainability ratings, LEED certification, passive house guidelines, enterprise green. So even though they're affordable and supportive housing, they actually have really well designed design teams, technically really strong, and so it's been, we've been working in that space, and that's been really rewarding to sort of work with these other like-minded designers that are willing to, work in these types of projects. Just some images of the space. A lot of our residents, like for example, the residents in Creston Avenue in the Bronx, formerly homeless. A lot of them that this was their first home off the street. A lot of these folks are on medication, so we needed to design a space that was open, clear sort of sight lines, and not sort of hemmed in. And so you'll see a lot of individual garden pockets, but thinking about their experience and trying to really tailor it to their ongoing use and where they are sort of psychologically. And so a lot of built-in seating, a lot of planting, opportunities for vegetable gardening. You can see on the lower left, and so we're often introducing urban farming as part of the programs, and it's been really rewarding to be part of that, really making use of a lot of spaces on the roofs. And some years you'll get a couple of people that are really into the garden, and then some years it'll just lie fallow. But just working and designing and thinking of flexibility and failure, and that it's okay if it's not going to work every single year, but just thinking about that. Connecting, it seems really obvious, but connecting outdoor spaces to community rooms and laundry spaces, on a daily use. This is another project also in the Bronx, but I wanted to give you an idea of just a typical, this is a rear yard. This particular program was for residents that were sort of survivors of HIV/AIDS, and so there was a big arts program, and so we worked with the client and really tried to carve out an outdoor space that could be used for outdoor classrooms, outdoor events, exercise. So from the very beginning of siting the building, we're able to sort of come in and really help locate the building in terms of grades, and I think being part of that conversation in the beginning can make a huge impact on what we do, or how we can make the most impact in terms of landscape. Stormwater management is a big issue in New York, probably similar to here, where we're sort of burdening the existing infrastructure. So we have a lot of new laws in terms of trying to keep as much stormwater on site. And so all of our projects are also sort of underground, trying to kind of use stormwater, rainwater as passive irrigation, and thinking about the landscape as stormwater storage is a big part of what we do. Yeah, the middle image, just thinking, so there are some families in this residence. So spaces for kids to sit, it's a kids scaled bleacher. You know, simple sort of design elements like that can really, you know, make a big impact in terms of types of use. This is in Brooklyn. This was a really tough site. We worked with Cook Fox Architects on this, and again, we had a very limited budget, but we had a huge grade change, and so one of the strategies was, could we, you know, build a slow ramp, make the grade change up to this community garden, but also make the ramp wide enough so it could be used as a sort of walking loop. And so, you know, just thinking creatively about how to deal with limited resources, you know, and also trying to avoid sort of big, massive retaining walls and so on. So the great thing about this project is we teamed up with another small non-profit, and they specialize in building community gardens, building and managing them. And so they're called Sprout by Design, and it's been great. There are lots of other sort of smaller design professions that are carving out and really trying to contribute and make a difference. So they both construct, build, and manage. So for a lot of these non-profit housing developments, it's perfect. You know, they come in, they're really efficient with what they do, they run their programs, and they can get access to funding separately. But it's really taken a while to sort of navigate like how that model, and so it's been really great to kind of discover and work with these guys. This is a big. This was a challenging site. A big parking lot on the shady side of the building, and probably one of the big things was a lot of these sites are infill, and so they might have been brownfield sites, meaning they might have been a gas station, or there was an oil spill, or there was some kind of industry, and so these are sites that no one else has wanted, and the city has been, I think, good in terms of allowing and providing these spaces for these non-profits to actually develop and sort of transform. But we're dealing with sort of dirty sites, and so we needed to figure out early on how could we build a healthy landscape, but stay above a certain datum. And one of the great things that we've developed too is relationships with civil engineers, and we've been able to sort of like design together, and that's been probably one of the most rewarding technical parts of our work, is working with some of these engineers that are really rethinking what goes underground, like all of the cost of these big tanks, and so thinking creatively about how do we do that, how do we store in a really thin profile, and so we've continued to work, and we have this core group of consultants that work with us, and we were able to solve technical problems and help the client reduce costs that go in the underground. So this essentially is a parking lot on the left-hand side. All of the water, there's no drainage in the parking lot. We're draining the entire area into this bioswale on the left, and then that forms an edge to the community amenity spaces on the right. This is probably the smallest project we have in the office right now, and this is for the B. Arthur Youth Shelter in the East Village. And this has really been a labour of love. It's a site that I used to walk past for years. It was boarded up for probably 15 years and was a crack house in the sort of late 70s, early 80s. And the city finally released it. We worked with the B. Arthur Foundation, and this is the first shelter for LGBTQ youth formerly homeless. And so it's they run really good programs, and their outdoor space has really been a key part of their rehabilitation and sort of like providing a secure, colourful, like small space where they can hang out, and it's a 4-story, 5-story building. Some of these, a lot of these buildings in the East Village had these, on the left-hand side, these two images of these, they're called a carriage stone. So this would be out the front on the street. You would get out of your horse carriage, you would step onto the stone and then onto your property. And so, we salvage this. It's now become the small seat that sits in the back, and it's a nod to the history of these sites. And we're often looking for clues and finding and trying to reuse materials. And so it's been a really rewarding. This is the first season, I think. We're going to open it this spring. These are two, again, large-scale projects in the Bronx. Very challenging site, big sites, 9 acres, 12 acres. This is still kind of partially in construction, but I kind of wanted to show you. On the left-hand side was when we arrived on site, and so on the right has been the sort of renovations that we've been able to do. So, I think the amazing thing working with these older sites is you're dealing with mature canopy trees, and they have, an amazing collection. It's almost like like an arboretum, a lot of them. And so, starting with that sort of overhead structure and really thinking about new materials, entrances, building entrances, improving these spaces. And so you can see these are some of the little design studies. Kind of low cost, but more about better organization, creating spaces for people to sit. And playgrounds, bringing color, is a big part of what we do. And I think, New Zealand does such a great job. I mean, every little town I visited is like amazing play spaces for kids. So these are sort of construction shots, but you can see just another layer of more recent, ideas about, perching, getting rid of fencing. A lot of these landscape spaces are fenced off. And so for the first time, residents have access to their huge campus. So I'm just going to end on this one project in just a bit more detail. This has been, we just finished this last year, and it's with the same architect, Map Architects, and I would say it's a really great sort of like lineage of starting something in Creston and being able to kind of work on a site, a much bigger site, complex site. The client was Catholic Charities, and there used to be a church, St. Augustine Church, on the site, and it's very typical of a lot of churches in our city. Congregations have dwindled. It's been really expensive to repair a lot of these historic buildings. So unfortunately, a lot of these churches, they just can't continue. And so Catholic Charities, they owned the site, they had the church, they decided to develop it as affordable and supportive housing. The church also had a food pantry as part of the church, and so we started the project with these specific program needs, and also there was a particular pastor who really loved this church and the idea of it, and the original importance of this space or this building and congregation in the community. And so the idea of this building and this landscape becoming a beacon, a different beacon in the neighborhood, was something that sort of ran through like their ideas from the client side. And so you'll see a lot of this rock in the front. This is the entrance. A lot of this was covered with the church, and so once they demoed, we discovered all of the stone once the church was pulled away. And very early on we were able to kind of convince, we realized it was such a special and amazing part of the site. And the Bronx is very hilly, there's a lot of stone outcroppings. It's really kind of amazing where the stone comes up. The Manhattan schist is revealed in the Bronx more than maybe some of the other boroughs. And so we convinced the client to not demo it and to push the building back from the street and really create this entry landscape that is preserving the sort of natural geology that was there, but also we found opportunities to kind of plant into it and use it. And so you step up into the building, it's pushed back. It has amazing views out, kind of south towards the city. And then on the image on the left-hand side, the food pantry is just to the left, so the food pantry gets its own little garden and gathering space, so there's enough space for that program to happen. This was our first visit to the site, so you can see we're really excited about the geology. Just some of the sort of early models, and a lot of our work is convincing anyone who will listen that it's a good idea. I think in terms of affordable housing, they typically don't have a lot of resources. It's not market rate, but they do have really clear missions and they have a really clear direction. And for us working with those teams, that's a really rewarding part of it. So as designers in the design team, it's our job to figure out how to make the most out of that sort of situation. And so less meetings, provide enough sort of design guidance early on and try and stay with the project for the life of it. So these are just some recent images from last year. And the image on the left, there's a New York City Parks playground just to the south. And then the image on the right is this little overlook sitting up above the rock looking out across the city. Thank you.